It is Thursday, the 28th of February, 2019, and this is the MMA Beat. Welcome back, everyone. My name is Luke Thomas. I am the host of this program. You know me from SiriusXM as well as MMAFighting.com, and we have together, I believe this is the first time we've had this combination of talent, so it might get exciting, but you know all these figures. They are not new, just the arrangement. To my left, from MMAFighting.com, that is Danny Segura. To his left is making her triumphant return, Phoenix Carnivale. She's from the In Fighting Shape podcast as well as UFC Unfiltered. You can see her on Access TV. And at the end of the table, Mr. Cash those checks himself. Let's see. I saw him do like a Max Kellerman type PBC show.
Oh yeah, check that out. PBC on Fox.
On Fox, I saw that, but of course primarily from CBS Sports Online. Lady, gents, how are we? Doing good?
Well, yeah, how about Phoenix and I on the same table? This is like Van Halen bringing David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar on the same tour. Take that, Chuck Mindenhall, you Gary Sharon-esque.
Yes.
Take that, yeah.
This is Danny and I were talking about the panel. We're like, we've never done this before, so we are going to give it a try. Chuck is out in Las Vegas, and the rest of us. Are you going to Vegas?
No.
Anybody here going to Vegas at all?
Nope.
No? Good. We're all going to be the non-Vegas donks here. All right. Speaking of Vegas, we should get into it. Wow. What a huge card we have this weekend, right?
Yeah.
It is so great. You just look at that card. There's a gem, there's a gem, there's a gem, all the way down. But let's start with the crown jewel, Danny Segura. Jon Jones at the top of the food chain. They're taking on Anthony Smith. And I tweeted about this yesterday just to poke the bear because that's what I like to do.
Yeah.
And I had everyone being like, oh, my God, you're jinxing it. Look at me. Look at me. There's no such thing as a jinx unless you read Harry Potter level books. In any event, people were saying, as I tweeted, that it's been a real quiet week for Jon Jones.
Yes,
to that point, Anthony Smith is getting more headlines than just about anybody else. Do you share my eeriness about this? Are you waiting for calamity to fall?
I mean, you never know. Last time they switched the event when I was like 2-3 days out or something like that, or it was a little more. But you never know. And MMA is a crazy sport. I mean, we saw the Robert Whittaker, Kelvin Gastelum situation where they were supposed to fight. I literally wake up day of. I'm like, what? It's not happening. So you never know. So let's keep our fingers crossed. But I do have a sense of like this feeling that Jon Jones knows that, he has been in trouble in the past, that has cost him, his career. Not only that, but it's cost, his fans as well. And he's been talking about that. He's like, I want to make it up to my fans. I want to be active. I want to stay, constantly fighting. And for that, you need to stay out of trouble. So knock on wood, hopefully nothing happens. But, I do feel like this is a much more mature Jon Jones. And, I expect no trouble.
Phoenix, refreshingly quiet or scary quiet?
Refreshing for me. I find it a relief. I like to focus on specific things when I watch a fight, especially with two exciting people like Jon and Anthony. So now I'm listening to things that I want to hear, which for me, I'm a little nerdy. So I like hearing that Jon's working on his boxing a little bit more, that he's been fighting southpaws in the past. Now he can focus on an orthodox fighter. I like the techniques. I like the fact that he went from fighting right into a fight camp, so he's already in shape. I like all those things. I like Anthony Smith being this underdog that people are kind of rallying behind and excited about. I love his camp, so I like hearing more about Anthony's camp. I was there. I watched him train at Factory X, so all the things that I want to talk about are being brought to light in this particular one. It's a lot less of the TMZ type of atmosphere this time around, and I can focus on these two athletes that I really like.
Brian, you are a guy who loves trashy material. Are you feeling deprived?
I am. For as much as what you're saying is right on, this is about what matters. This is about the fights. This is about Jon Jones being back on a quick turnaround, good for fans, without pictograms, without stick pills, if you will, right? If you have you done that? Anyway, back to you. Look, it's good in that regard. But this week, it's kind of missing a little bit of buzz. This is an old school loaded card. So many storylines to talk about, so many faces you just want to see in a fight, a lot going on. But when you're reaching for a casual fan base, and that's what you're doing at pay-per-views, you're going to reach a certain number of hardcores always. You try to reach above that. You still do need a strong main event. And while I really like Anthony Smith, I really like his story, we're not supposed to have stay busy, soft touch fights, especially on the title pay-per-view main event level in the UFC. And because of the alarmingly lack of depth in this 205-pound division, this very much feels like a stay busy title defense, move the chains.
I want to make sure we don't get too much into the co-main event while we're still talking about the main event. We will get to it.
I like
obviously.
to start shows with 10-minute rants on GSP, so
I
if you
noticed
can just
that.
give me the floor right now.
But here's the thing. I think that the real simmering feud, which we will talk about, is that co-main event. You kind of feel like that one might go the distance. This one, odds tell you probably not. I just don't need every single UFC pay-per-view to be filled this way. I would agree if it's a trend, then you get into a bit of a problem. But let me throw this to the table, whoever wants this one. What do you make of Jon's mood? He is at once breezy and easy, and on the other hand, you ask him about the fights, and then he changes real quick, and he gets kind of dialed in. It's like, this is how it's, not the ordinariness of it, but this kind of feels like how it's supposed to be and how it's not been. It's so unusual. Yeah. I like his approach to this fight week.
Yeah, this is 100% how it's supposed to be. The UFC has made it a trend lately where every single pay-per-view, every single fight has to be a banger, right? Every single fight has to be the biggest fight there ever was. Double champ, triple champ, you name it.
Interim champ.
Interim champ, yes, double interim champ. Well, I'm guessing we'll talk about that soon. But yeah, this is the way it's supposed to be. These are the type of fights that either shock the world, like Matt Serra did against GSP, or that build up, someone's legacy, someone's longevity, or that build up towards other fights. Imagine if Jon Jones goes on and builds a crazy streak, 2-3 fights, and then goes up to heavyweight. All that, is momentum. So this is the way that the fight game is supposed to work. You can't have crazy pay-per-views, crazy fights every single time. It's okay to have some of these fights every now and then.
Do you guys like Jon's approach?
I do. I like it from the standpoint of, we're coming in here saying, okay, who really is Anthony Smith? 13 defeats, good story, he's tough. Is it just a stay busy thing like I mentioned off the top? And I like Jones' approach from here is he's saying, look, I'm not going to have a repeat of the first Gustafsson fight. I'm not taking anybody lightly anymore, ever again. I'm not taking my training lightly anymore. This is the most professional Jon Jones has really ever sounded or ever been. So that's refreshing in that regard. This week missing a little bit lack of buzz, though, but outside of that, it's a card I need to see, I want to see.
I don't know if it's missing lack of buzz, but it's like, what do you consider buzz? Do you consider controversy buzz? If that's the case, then yes. But to me, buzz is like, he's really freaking good. He's really freaking good. He's really dangerous. Like, that gets me excited more about a fight. And, I've seen Jon Jones and I've listened to your interviews with Greg Jackson and it's like super interesting. What this guy is still developing. He's still curious. I mean, I watched Jon because he used to train with Phil Nurse and him see a technique that some kid would do. And he'd be like, that's interesting. Let me try that a couple of times. So he's always building on his skills. He's always learning new things. People talk about Jon's jiu-jitsu now a little bit too. Anthony Smith, I've watched him roll. And Jon's jiu-jitsu is really good, and it's good jiu-jitsu for MMA specifically because when he gets that ground and pound, he's able to hold you there. He's able to land the strikes from the ground and pound because he knows his positioning and where he's going to land those strikes, and that gets me excited. And that gets me excited against a guy like Anthony Smith who's at his healthiest peaking point. So that's buzz to me. That's exciting to me. I think Jon's approach being talking to the media, he doesn't have to be so defensive because there's nothing for him to be defensive about. We've already talked about the USADA thing 3,000 times. I'm so sick of hearing about it. So he's less defensive, which means he's more communicating. He's answering questions better. It reminds me of how fun was he? Remember when he ran after the guy with the wallet thing and he was telling the story and we all loved him. We were so in love with him. And then, the bad boy thing came out and who is he? Is he good or is he bad? He's both, honestly. He's both. He's good sometimes. He's a party animal other times. So just have a good fight, man. That's all I care about.
In terms of buzz, I do think Brian makes a point that like the kind of thing that Phoenix, you and I might like.
Yeah.
At scale, how widely is that appreciated? There's probably some question about that.
Sure.
Controversy is, but we're also so in the bubble that we're like, we just can't get the mud of controversy off of us in the shower. It's a little bit overwhelming.
Also, it's still kind of early. I remember like the Cormier.
There's still time for something.
Look, I remember the second Cormier fight. It didn't feel all that big, but then once like Friday rolled out, you're like, oh snap, these two are fighting. This is legit. Like this is big. Let's wait and see what happens in the next few days. We still have, the weigh-ins, the face-offs, all that. So
you never know. All right, I'll admit this. The Jon versus Cormier thing, I loved every second of that. There were the memes and like the way how much they hated each other and this like.
It was so ugly.
But it was hilarious too in a lot of ways. They did this bit, and you guys can find it online, of Daniel Cormier and the Dave Chappelle thing.
Yes.
Where it's the funniest thing ever. So I like stuff when it's legit. I don't like things where it's like just beating a dead horse.
So then that takes us to the last thing about Jones I wanted to focus in on, which is there is no overarching narrative this time. People are trying to be like, oh, is this the beginning of the solidification of your status as GOAT, which I suppose if it's a win, it certainly is a contribution. How significant? There's probably an open question about that. But I guess the question about Jon that I was sort of trying to figure out here is, when you think about the narrative for Jon in this fight, because there has to be some kind of narrative here, like what is it? It's not about overcoming haters. In fact, here's what's so crazy about this. I was looking at all the videos he's been in and all the comments, and yeah, the comment sections are always going to be filled with people being like, LOL, picogram, and all that kind of stuff. but the up-down ratio on YouTube is high. The views are high. Social media interest seems high. This dude keeps winning. Here's my narrative. I'd like to go on the table. My narrative is, if this dude can reasonably stay out of trouble and just collect victory, even if it's an Anthony Smith or a Johnny Walker or whoever, it is going to completely reform his image. He will be a hero again.
You're right. You're right.
It is absolutely possible.
It took us 2 seconds after that 214 knockout of Cormier in the rematch to instantly write he is the greatest of all time. He always was the greatest of all time. We want him to be the greatest of all time.
And that we like him.
And that we like him. But how about this? Can I throw a narrative out against the wall, see if it sticks?
Yep.
How about this could be or should be his last fight at 205 pounds?
Ooh.
I mentioned that Anthony Smith, great story, but is he really deserving of a title shot in a more crowded division? No. Okay, I like beating up Wash guys. I like beating up maybe a Never Will Be in Vulcan. Maybe a little bit too harsh to the way I was raised, but you shake that head.
You are a hater.
I did say Wash Goldie before. That gets you really mad when I bring that up too. Anyway, back to
get
this.
Mad.
The point is, look, what else is there? You look at that top 15, a lot of guys Jones already beat, a lot of guys coming off of losses. There's a Dom Reyes and there's a Johnny Walker Red who are looking pretty good right now. But are they ready for a title shot? Do you waste that now? Jon, just by staying busy and winning, Jon's going to move into that GOAT if he's not already there. If you're a GSP guy, which we established last week, some people are, Jones is going to pass that. But if he goes to heavyweight now rather than later, the amount of big business matchups available, every time he fights at heavyweight, it's going to be have to see, can't miss. And the opportunities to expand historically what he's already accomplished, you can speed that up a lot.
Any other narratives for you guys?
I think the narrative is that he's out there to become the GOAT. Everybody was always like, skill-wise, you look at Jon Jones, you might just say he's the greatest. His biggest enemy has been himself. Because in order to become the GOAT, you got to fight. In order to, fight, you got to stay active and stay out of trouble. And he, through a bunch of circumstances, he hasn't been able to achieve that in this stage of his career. But I remember a time where, he was just destroying people. Lyoto Machida, Shogun, Rampage. He was just going through people, and you're like, God, who can stop this man? And that sort of wondering feeling, we kind of lost it because the whole thing was, okay, when is Jon Jones going to get into trouble? What's next? What's this? And I feel like the quick turnaround, the Anthony Smith fight, about not just pursuing a super fight, but the deserving contender who, whoever's up next in the line, all of that just adds into look, I'm here, I'm an active fighter, I'm going to reach that GOAT status. And he said he might become the GOAT, at the end of this year. So that's fun to watch. And I think that's the storyline. This is a guy that's going to get back on the horse and prove everybody wrong that, he is the greatest.
Anything you want to add, Phoenix?
No, I think it's the same type of thing. Stay fighting, fight different, diverse type of characters so we can see the multitude of skills that you possess, and then we can have that conversation no matter what division it's at.
Very good. That takes us very quickly. I want to make sure we don't forget about poor Anthony Smith. I say poor, but my God, the guy's gotten a ton of attention. I've had him on both of my shows. He did a huge media tour here in New York City. He said something on the UFC Unfiltered podcast. I caught it on Embedded, where he said, I feel like a criminal because I feel like I know something that the rest of anybody, no one else does, and I'm going to just go ahead and take that title. Jon appears to be dialed in, but at the same time, Anthony Smith has a quiet calm about him too. Jon said that he saw his lip quiver in the stare down. I don't know what to make of things like that. But Brian, what do you make of the approach to this fight that Anthony has had and the moment and what he's making of it to get some attention?
It's probably the best to lay low and be as quiet as he's doing. He's selling his own story of where he's come. And look, I don't want to overlook that. 5-6 as a professional at one point with 6 stoppage losses. Not many guys can turn that around and go on the run he's been on and get themselves up to a UFC title situation. But I think from an emotional point of view, he hasn't tried too hard to poke the bear on Jon. And the more he can avoid getting involved in anything controversy that would extra motivate Jon, I think it's the best for him to have a chance to go out there and surprise him inside the cage.
What do you think, Phoenix?
I like the silent killers. I really do. I like the people who just prove themselves inside the cage. I'm comfortable with that. I do like his story. I think he's well-spoken. I think he's very smart. I love his team. I'm fine with it. I don't need much.
Just a good fighter, huh?
Yeah, I do.
And also, he does have a really great team behind him, too. He's not some guy who's a good story, and you don't really know the other cast of characters. He's got an elite coach, and I think it's also part of why there's a little bit of intrigue in his chances.
It's a battle of the coaches, too, if you think about it. I mean, Mark Montoya is coming up. Greg Jackson's camp, that they are already very, very established. It's really cool for me to watch both of them.
Love it.
I want to say this real quick about his chances, not to steal the thunder here, but if this had been the fight with Jones coming off of 15 months, coming off the USADA thing, and there's the idea of cage rust, the idea of is he the same guy, I think Smith would have a much greater chance. But for what he did against Gustafsson in that rematch, he showed me he's a Jones 2.0, that his 30s may be able to extend on the upper elite GOAT level for a long time because he's doing almost Tyron Woodley type stuff where he's efficiently navigating distance and using his strengths. And I think that makes me think even less of Anthony Smith's chances. It's hard for me to get excited about that he has a chance in this fight because of surgically what I know Jones can do in there.
I can see why you'd say that for sure, yeah.
Danny?
Back to the approach thing. All I want is for fighters to be real, right? If you're going to go in there and talk trash, okay, fine, do it. But as long as it comes off as real, as long as, it's genuine and it's legit. I've interacted with Anthony Smith a few times, off camera, as he was on the MMA Hour and stuff like that. Dude, whoever he is off camera, he's exactly the same person on camera.
100% true.
And that's all I want from people, just being real. So, I think this build-up is perfect, but not specifically because he's quiet and he's respectful and he's kind of taking a different approach from this Conor McGregor era, but just because he's being himself, he's being real. So
very Marty Usman of him, saying bring that same energy.
Right.
Speaking of which, let's go to that one. Tyron Woodley, we talked about Jon Jones, and again how the fans are all of a sudden jumping right back on the bandwagon, which people love winners, dude. They love winners. And I think what's happened with Tyron Woodley as he gets ready to face Kamaru Usman on Saturday is that Darren Till win was a light bulb moment for a lot of the hardcore fan base. They're like, oh, right, he actually is really, really good. And he's also gone out of his way to not be as combative with management as he once did. So between that change in strategy and then the success he's having in the octagon, I think folks have really begun to recognize, oh my God. In fact, I've been going and sort of looking at what people are saying about the two fighters, and no one's really giving Usman a chance, which I think is totally the wrong attitude. I think Usman, if he loses and Tyron wins, I think that makes him, in my judgment, the second best welterweight of all time. He would far surpass Hughes' resume at that point. But let's talk about Tyron for just a second. Phoenix, I'll go to you. Do you notice a reformation in his image? All of a sudden, it feels like the wind finally is at his back.
I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think one reason is the Darren Till win, and I think the other reason is people getting to see Tyron's real personality, and that might be because Ben Askren's around, and you see how funny Tyron is, and you see, what a great sense of humor he has, what a good teammate he is, how smart he is, and it has a lot to do with their banter back and forth.
That's a great point. So
seeing that really humanizes him. We know because we've talked to him either on camera or off camera. My boyfriend's a stunt guy. He worked on a film with him. He's like, Tyron's hilarious. He's hilarious. And then, he has his podcast, D's Nuts, which I was on, and it was all jokes. We talked about jokes and psychology and all types of stuff.
The name of the podcast is
D's Nuts. Yeah. So he has such a great personality, but we don't get to see that because he was bitter and angry. He would showcase that. He would talk about that publicly, his issues with Dana White. We know that fans can bandwagon, whatever someone says, and they'll jump on that. And then he did come off very standoffish for a long period of time. So seeing this interaction with him and a friend really shows you a big part of his personality. I think that does a lot.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think, fans are coming around because that Darren Till win was big for him because he went through a lot of fights that were perhaps not so exciting. And the Darren Till, he just shut everybody up. But, he's right. He's been fighting a bunch of specialists where one single mistake can cost you a fight. So you have to be very careful. And I also think, he's always put on great performances. He's always achieved, great victories. But they've been kind of tainted by the fact that he's right off the bat, he's asking for big fights and people don't feel like he deserves them yet. Why are you asking for Nick Diaz? Just focus on first defending your belt, blah, blah, this, that. And I feel like that rubbed, some people the wrong way. And I feel like at this point, not that he's tired of that pursuit, but, the UFC at the end of the day, and he said it, the UFC is the UFC. They're going to do what they want. So, I'm here fighting for them and that's what I'm going to do. And, that mentality of, hey, look, I'm just going to take the top dog. Also what Jon Jones is doing in this scenario, I think that comes across very well with fans.
Yeah, fans like frictionless fighters. You know, oh, it's a fight, I'll take it.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned maybe there aren't as many people giving Usman a big chance in this as they should, and I think they should, because here's the thing. Woodley's genius in the last, he's 4 title defenses up to this point, has been the mindset of being able to disarm his opponent of their best skill and in many ways use that against them to beat them, right? Outpointed the point fighter and Thompson. You hear Woodley go on this run all the time. I outslugged Lawler, I outgrappled the great Damian Maia.
He more out-wrestled Maia. He didn't really out-grapple him, but to your point,
To my point, correct there. But Usman, and this is the same argument Woodley's giving in defense of why he doesn't have a chance. I know he's got that great wrestling base, but he's pretty well-rounded across the board, and he's got an incredible motor, and he's trained himself to be able to go 5 hard rounds and be up in your kitchen the whole time. For a 36-year-old Woodley, this is maybe one of the harder matchups he could be in against at this point, because it's not just that one specific skill he can disarm and use his brains to do. It's going to be a guy who's coming forward the whole time. It's going to make him work.
Right.
I know Woodley has reversed it and said, what does he do better than me? Nothing. But,
which is true.
But if you have warning track power in every category and you put it together, you're a mixed martial artist. You're a well-rounded fighter, and Usman has that dog in him. So I think this could be a sleeping.
So this, I completely agree. It's like if when Tyron Woodley asks, what is he better than me at? Okay, he's right. The answer is nothing. In pure just sort of demonstration of skill, Tyron has shown a higher level in all of them, and perhaps even in fight IQ. But the Achilles heel, right? When they dipped Achilles, and this is why it was called the Achilles heel, right? Because they had to grab him by the heels to dip him to the river to make him impervious. His heel is that I don't think he has an elite gas tank. I think he has a good gas tank, and I think he manages his resources very well. It is not merely that Kamaru Usman has a good gas tank. Kamaru Usman has a historically nearly unparalleled gas tank. That's what he has. It is
You might as well get Brown Pride, Velasquez style across his chest. It's that good.
There's a major disparity in their ability to produce volume of offense. So I expect Usman to have a very tough fight early. And if it goes late, I expect it to switch. And so the question for me, as I asked at the beginning of this, if Woodley can defeat a guy like that, and then a guy like Maia, and then a guy like Lawler, and then a guy like Thompson, show me anybody on Hughes' resume, any string of opponents that can even come close to that. And I know it's like, oh, you're comparing eras. Yeah, dude. The task in front of Woodley is ridiculous. Who agrees, who disagrees?
I 100% agree with you there, because the evolution of the fighter has gone leaps and bounds, even in the last 10 years. What's impressed me so much about Tyron is that he's almost been like the Marvel character Rogue, where he picks up a skill every time he fights somebody. You know, like when she would touch someone, she would absorb their powers. It's a little bit like that. So it's interesting going into this fight camp. Is he saying, is there something I need to change in my conditioning? Do I have to lose a little bit of muscle mass so that I don't get tired as much? So it's interesting. I think the second he walks to the cage and we look at his physique, we might say maybe he's lost a little bit of muscle. Maybe he's faster. Maybe his gas tank is a little bit better. But if he does defeat Usman, it might be the type of thing where we have to start looking at him a little bit differently and start changing the conversation.
Best way to hammer home your point, GSP don't want that sauce. He doesn't even want to taste it. It's not an age thing because they're like a year and a half apart. Right. So that says a lot.
Danny, am I overstating the stakes here? Or?
No. I think you're on point. I mean, the whole thing about, and I made it this point, last time on the beat was, longevity, it's not really that the fact of like, wow, he held onto a belt for so many years. It's the fact that throughout those years, you have to fight the man at the time every single time. And it's not always going to be the same fighter. So you're going to get different looks. And that's how you see someone's greatness. Okay, he took on a great wrestler. He took on a karate guy. He took on a young prospect, that has a lot of power. This, that. And this is, again, a very different fighter from all the guys, he's faced before. And if he gets to pass this test, it just adds on to, his resume of what fighters what styles, what challenges he can overcome. So, yeah, I think, he wins this, and all of a sudden you got to start getting into that conversation of he might be one of the greatest welterweights ever.
Let's flip it and talk about Usman very quickly. I love this conversation that's happening now. He did it on my show. I think he did it on the MMA Fighting interview with either Ramundi or Al Shadi, where they discussed D2 versus D1 wrestling.
That's right.
And how Tyron was like, I'm D1, I don't know about that. And you can tell it bugs Usman for a couple of reasons. One, he was a D2 national champ. Two, it can be just, for folks who may not know, in American football, there's a enormous gap between D1 and D2, right? Like, only the best recruits go to D1. D2 is like, scrubs, okay? In wrestling, it's not quite like that, to the point, because Usman, after leaving D1 and going on the freestyle circuit, smashed a number of standout D1 wrestlers. So it's a lot more fluid, and you can tell it bugs him. The story of Usman heading into this one is the guy who people don't take seriously. Tyron Woodley was hated, and right as he turns to everyone's hero, Usman was hoping to catch some of that wind, and he got none of it. He's swimming upstream. He's a little bit goofy, Kamaru Usman, which I say almost as a compliment. Do you pick up on any of these things? I can tell he's got a real status chip on his shoulder. He even acknowledges, yeah, maybe Tyron is better than me in certain things, but here's one thing I always do. I will be in your face, constantly wearing on you. There's something, we talked about Anthony Smith being like, oh, I know something. No, Kamaru knows something. Do you agree or no?
I can see it a little bit. I can see it a little bit as far as he has to justify things and explain it to fans, which I feel like sometimes you have to do because, like I said, the sort of bandwagon thing, someone who does not come from a wrestling background, I have more of a striking background, so I have to, when we're at work, I have to ask Pat Miletich all the time, what does that mean? What does this mean? What does that mean? So Kamaru having to explain the D1, the D2, and what I've done and who I did and what, to almost justify against what Tyron says or what someone else says, I get that he has to do that because he's got to show the other side of everything rather than just sitting there and taking the diss.
I think it's more about the chip on the shoulder because he's having to take the long way to get to the title shot. Who else outside of Max Holloway has to win 9 in a row to finally get a title shot? I mean, we're talking all the time about
Tony Ferguson.
You want to go down the list?
There's a lot.
We're talking more about guys like Gastelum who were like, didn't just lose to Weidman. I don't think he's deserving here. So what I'm saying is that builds up the callus over time. And if Usman had, and we know this, if he had half the charisma of somebody even like a Colby Covington, he already would have fought for the title. So I think that builds up and that makes you into a grinding warrior over time.
I think for me is the fact that, look, throughout all his career, he never really got a nice shot. He never really got set up to, succeed and have a nice opportunity and have, a good chance. He beat Damian Maia. The reason why he fought Damian Maia, I mean, it was already a Damian Maia that had already been through a lot, on a few losses. Then, he fought RDA, right? He went on to fight RDA. So he never got Robbie Lawler. He was never put in a situation of like, hey, look, this might be the #1 contender. Let's prop him up in a co-main event. He never got that chance. I mean, the only reason why he was close to getting a title shot the other day was because he was a replacement opponent. So even for that, he cut weight. He's always wanted it, and I feel like he's never really gotten, I wouldn't say a fair shake, but he's never really gotten a great opportunity. Even for this one, Colby Covington was hit up first. Well, I don't know if you want to argue about that, but Colby Covington was hit up first. So he was sort of second choice there. Yet again, he took the opportunity. So I feel like he feels like he's not being respected as a contender. People don't respect him. But the fact is he hasn't really gotten the chance to prove his skills. And the people that, he's been matched up against, he's defeated, pretty handily. But then there's, they're washed up. They're all this. So he's out there to prove, hey, look, I am the best. And you just watch.
Yeah, he got him after Colby a couple times, right? So folks are like, and remember, he went to war with, not war, but Dana White was like, what's that 30%?
Oh yeah, that was a big deal.
And so he got kind of thrown under the bus for that one too. So he's had I'm not going to say he's the new Tyron Woodley because they're very, very different guys, but he's occupying this contender, up and coming guy he's not at war with the promotion, but he's not exactly been their darling either. Yeah. And now he's got this great opportunity to go do something pretty amazing. You mentioned Ben Askren, so I'll throw back to you on this one, and then we'll move on from UFC 235. Jesus Christ, you want to talk about the breakout star of UFC 235? It's Ben Askren. Look at all the online numbers. He is tearing it up. People love his shtick. It's so amazing. When he was at ONE FC and fighting all those donks, people are like, who is this guy? What a loser. He sucks. And all of a sudden, you get that UFC rub, and you got Tyron Woodley putting his arm around him, metaphorically speaking, and everything else. Folks have warmed to him, Phoenix. Are you as surprised as I am? Not that they turned, but that this heavily.
Yes and no, because there's a YouTube video I put up like years ago, and it was of Dana really just kind of talking so bad about Askren, and YouTube doesn't pay a lot, but I got a $73 check from YouTube, and I was like, people care this much? Because $73 on a YouTube video is a lot. Yeah. So I was really shocked at how many hardcore martial arts fans are just so pro Askren in the first place. Then him coming over got him a lot more sort of the pop culture MMA fans' attention. And then his behavior, his jokes, his personality, his stick back and forth with Dana, of course there's a lot of light on him. And I think now is the time for someone like Askren, because now we're appreciating wrestlers a lot more than we ever did. You can even hear it with sort of American fans when someone passes guard or gets to mount. There's more of this than there ever was before. We enjoy the ground more than we ever have before. So it's a good time for him.
Yeah, well, all UFC needed to do was get out of the John Fitch business, and we now can appreciate a guy like this. There's no question about
So
it.
what about that then? Because the issue is Kamaru Usman raised was, well, wait till they see him fight. They're going to be very surprised. And to that point, I can distinctly recall live tweeting his fight against Koreshkov, which is literally one of the most dominant fights in welterweight history in any organization. And I had people telling me constantly how bored they were. Have they switched, or is Usman right that if it looks like that, they're going to pick it up?
Well, I think he's able to add some mustard on top of it. Not that you need to do this, but he'll slap a guy in the ass. He'll clown them as he's totally destroying them on the ground. There's only so exciting that can be, but I think you mix that with the danger of, is his striking even better than remedial level? Can he actually do this? The asterisk look, there's always been an asterisk around Askren. Mm-hmm. It's like he's that sort of high-end, IPA that you're just sort of like specialty, but can he do it? Can he sell mainstream? Can he do this? Can he compete against these guys? There's so much riding on this fight, I believe. Yeah. I know other people have come in. Eddie Alvarez lost his debut to Donald Cerrone, still went on to become a title, but because Askren's reputation has been built up so long on the idea of the eye test and the idea of imagining what would happen, you mix that with the trash talk. I mean, he attacked everybody short of Tyron Woodley on social media after he signed that UFC deal. It's must win on Saturday night. And he loves this pressure. He lives in it. You watch these interviews, he's like, I got nothing to worry about. You see him coming out in flip-flops for the stare down yesterday, looking like a dad. I mean, it's just like, it's great. But there is a lot riding on the line here. If he comes out here and drops and loses and can't live up to that reputation that we've given him because he's beaten all those donks, to your credit, it's not going to mean as much. Yeah. And this ain't Lyman good on Saturday. This is, this may be a shop-worn Lawler, but he brings it.
Yeah. And this is a perfect storm for Askren. I still have to wait till Saturday, see how that fight looks, because I wonder if it is boring, because fans right now are just kind of behind it because of all the trash talk of everything that's going on. But wait till he fights. Maybe some fans don't really like his style and end up, going the other way. But this is the perfect storm for him, because he drew a lot of attention with that trade. That trade was very significant, was a historic moment for MMA, and he was involved. Mm-hmm. And not only that, but it wasn't trading, Viviano Fernandez. It wasn't trading, someone that's just very skilled and quiet. It was Ben Askren, who you knew had beef with Dana White. So that just added sort of intrigue to the whole situation. And then he goes in there and goes in the room just firing everywhere, going after every single welterweight. And I feel like people enjoy that in this Conor McGregor era, but at the same time, people are also tired of the same trash talk, the same type of I'm the best, and the sunglasses and the chin up, it's that type of trash talk. And Ben Askren is a very smart guy, and he brings a different style. He sort of brings that Chael Sonnen trash talk a little bit. And I feel like people appreciate that. People want to hear the trash talk, but they want to hear, smart, genuine trash talk.
So to answer the question for the table, that will overcome whatever lack of excitement his style brings.
Well, see, maybe it's exciting, because sometimes remember when Eric Silva fought Jon Fitch? Jon Fitch's whole purpose of that fight was to take him down and, put on what fans would perceive as a boring fight. But the battle of the back and forth of the stand-up going back down, the punching, that made it exciting. So we might be in for an exciting fight, even though the plan is still to take the fight.
Well, the thing with the taking down and the holding down, it's not exciting if you're just holding the person, right? It's exciting if like what Khabib does, or even what Jon does. You hold them down, you get them in a position where you can land your strikes, which is why everybody likes MMA, but specifically for the ground and pound, the ability to dominate, control, strike, and then either get the stoppage or whatnot. So I think that's what we're looking for. Is your wrestling adaptable to MMA striking and control, right? So I think that's what we need to see. And maybe he surprises all of us and just strikes. I wouldn't do it with Robbie, but I'll tell you this. I recently...
Yeah, he's not going to do that.
Right. I recently watched...
a right hand like Khabib knocks him.
But I recently watched Rory and Robbie. And Rory took Robbie down a lot. Like, a lot.
Yep.
But Robbie, more significant strikes, and Robbie was striking from the bottom. Robbie had great elbows from the bottom, and I think that's why he won that split decision. So this is an interesting fight for me in terms of that technique.
And there was a time when he had, Lawler did, there was a time when he had incredible takedown defense. Mm-hmm. But coming off the injury, God only knows what that's going to be. Right. So there's just a ton of questions. about what he really has left. It's going to be interesting to see what happens there. We could go on about this card forever. There's a million storylines, but let's move it along. Let's circle back, if we can, to me and Danny's favorite topic, the interim titles. Let's advance this one a little bit. So what ends up happening, we do the show on Thursday, Friday rolls around, and they decide that we were talking about Gastelum and Adesanya, I believe.
Yes.
On that same card, it turns out, they're going to have, interestingly, the lighter weight fight is going to be the main event. That one caught me by surprise. Okay, so the main event, Dustin Poirier taking on the featherweight champ. Moving up, apparently, permanently, we don't know, kind of a thing. They'll be fighting for a interim lightweight belt. So you're going to have the first UFC card ever, 2 interim titles in the main and co-main. All right, Danny. I don't want to relitigate everything from last week, because I know some of our viewers are.
I'd like a rematch. If you notice, Danny grew out the mustache. He's ready. He's ready.
Some of our viewers are just really delicate butterflies. They can't process 2 people arguing. But okay, so let's avoid a little bit of that. But I'll give you the first and final word on this one. Not necessarily about our debate, but when you heard that news on Friday, what was your biggest takeaway about it? Because we haven't even talked about it. Tony Ferguson's kind of floating in the ether too. What did you make of it?
About the lightweight booking or the 2 interim title fights on the card?
The lightweight booking.
Well, I was caught by surprise because I thought the fight to make was, you put in Tony Ferguson, Dustin Poirier, and you sort of start clearing things up because, one of them's got
for an interim belt or no?
Yeah, for an interim belt. I thought that was the fight to make, right? But it turns out, Tony couldn't agree with the promotion in some things we don't really know. It seems to be money, and they went with Holloway Poirier. I think this just makes even a bigger mess at lightweight. I mean, how can it not mix things up? And not only that, but now you're getting another division involved. So possibly we can see some mess going down at featherweight. Look, I agree. Interim titles do not guarantee title shots. I agree that they are messy, but sometimes they are needed. And I don't know. My reaction was just.
Is this one needed? You think?
Well, keeping in mind that Khabib is going to stay out for a while, I do think an interim title could have been used, but I don't think it's being used properly because it doesn't have the 2 guys that are deserving for that spot, and that is Tony Ferguson and Dustin Poirier.
I look at a lot of this as like casting. Like when you're casting actors, it's like not just who the best actor is, it's sometimes who's available for that film at that moment. So a lot of these things about filling up cards is almost the same way you go about casting things. And I'm not saying that Poirier doesn't deserve to be up there because he totally does. But if Ferguson doesn't want to do anything, what are you going to do? You can't necessarily wait. Let them negotiate whatever they need to negotiate. I'm kind of thinking this is, hey, Max, welcome to this division. And here's the top person, and you guys are placeholding for the next situation unless you're not available. You know what I mean? Like, I kind of think that that's what it is. I don't necessarily know how much it bothers me anymore. I just wish there was a very clear, after this amount of time, if you can't fight, then the interim situation happens. And that's not clear, and that's why we're always like, okay. That's how I see it.
Yeah, this is some first-class boxing bullshit, and it's sort of, it is. It's right from the playbook of every televised fight needs a belt. Why I don't hate it is because I'm numb, to your point, and because I love the crap out of these matchups. But it's crap right now. It's a loaded division at 155 that unless you're announcing Max is moving full-time, doesn't need him right now and doesn't need him in this spot. Tony Ferguson has deserved more than anybody. I know there's financial situations and argument right there, but let's really break it down. I mentioned this last week. You ruin the value of championships when you have too many interim titles. Then you ruin the value of interim titles when you take them off people and throw them around left and right. Can we just remove what an interim championship is? Because what it is at its core, it's a number 1 contenders match. It's a you have next thing.
Yeah.
And sometimes that person who's supposed to have next.
Mostly.
But sometimes that person who's supposed to have next, Colby Covington, doesn't get it for whatever reason. So can they not be champions in the system? Instead of a title, a belt. Can we get a jacket? Can we do something really corny like golf?
A ring?
Can we get this MMA, so we get a black jacket with bloodstains on it or something? And my point to this is, when you look at the heavyweight lineage in UFC championship history, do you consider Shane Carwin a heavyweight champion?
I haven't really thought about it.
No, you don't.
He did hold an interim. He beat Frank Mir.
And when you look at the welterweight championship history, and it's a GSP, it goes from Hughes to GSP to Woodley, you don't consider Carlos Condit a real champion, and neither do you, Phoenix. I'm looking deep into your eyes. I know this, all right?
Because it was just,
don't be
he
weird.
didn't defend it a million
I am
times.
weird. That's the difference, all right? But I'm passionate. And my point is, it's crap. It devalues the system. So just change what it is.
But let me say this.
It's not a title belt.
Hold on, let's
change what it is.
Let's figure out the UFC's position on this one. They've got Khabib sitting out a year. And what I've read from most people is, okay, if he's going to be out a year, maybe you have to have an interim title. That's a little bit debatable, but there is at least, I think, some sympathy for that position. So, okay, you call up Tony Ferguson, you say, you're our first choice guy. We want you to be in an interim title fight. He says, no thanks. Now, maybe they didn't give him enough money. Maybe there's something else, but he said no. He said no to the ostensibly the most coveted position. Now, I don't know about the whole Holloway part, but going to Poirier, I have no problem with. But here's what I guess what I'm saying is, if you're the UFC, how do you solve this problem when you have a champ sitting out longer than he actually needs to, and you've got a number one contender who's just all middle fingers, but totally deserved?
You drew the black jacket with the red stains. I just nailed it. But my point on Ferguson, what we don't know, is what if he told UFC, look, I already took that dangerous stay busy fight against Anthony Pettis and produced a fight of the year in which I took damage. I already took that just to stay busy. I'm waiting for Khabib. I have earned Khabib. I earned that title. Not that crap title that you gave me that one time and then took it away from me unceremoniously. I deserve the... What if that's what he said? And they're like, no, we got to move business along. We got to cast people.
So who's in the right? What do you do? What do you do?
Well, I think at the end of the day, these guys are prize fighters. I think if you throw enough money out there, the man will fight, right?
Right.
That's the end goal. I mean, if you say to somebody, would you rather fight for $500,000, say for just that pay, or $100,000 and for an interim title? I'm sure people would just pick the money. So if you throw enough money out there for Tony Ferguson, the man will fight, right? Out of the fact that it's a lot of money and not maybe so much the interim title, because I don't know how much he believes in interim belts. But
I think he does. He just had it, and now he doesn't want to just go back to what he already had and won.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
But nonetheless, like if you're gonna, because the alternative to that is what? Sitting out and then have somebody else be crowned interim champ, and then also have your same claim, like, hey, look, you got a belt. It's like the Spider-Man thing. It's like we both got belts. Who's fighting for who's fighting for the title type thing.
Any comic book reference makes me happy.
It was more a meme reference, but yeah.
Did you see Tony tweet out right after, I can make 145? Yeah. Wouldn't Tony versus Max at 145 for the real featherweight title kind of fix this whole thing?
Tony has talked about being, around 200 pounds.
But you
he
get his point.
He used to fight at welterweight, dude.
Yes.
You get his point, though.
Yeah.
His point is he wants a
Yeah.
championship. His point is he deserves it. He wants a championship. He's 35. He's not young.
This is just, to me, it's like, here's a major problem. This is the few problems I see. Number one, you burned Tony already. You needed him to come back, but you already burned him. You took away a title, and he had one of the most, truly, one of the most miraculous recoveries I've ever seen from an ACL injury. So he comes back on the card where Conor and Khabib are fighting, and then beats a former champion, stops him, albeit the corner through the towel, but still, put it on him, okay? So you burned him. You've devalued interim titles. I think we can all agree with that. Yeah. 3, what you've done is you have to say, we got to have a title on the card. We got to have a title on the card. So you're just pumping out for marketing purposes all of these. And then you've got this champion in Khabib. Again, I kind of feel like he was done wrong by the commission. Now, that's not the UFC's fault, but he's got hard feelings about the apparatus generally. It's this convergence of fail everywhere you can go. And I don't know how they untangle this mess. I don't think that money. Jose, I don't think that the way they did it is the best way. I don't know that there is the best way.
Yeah.
I don't know how you fix this.
You know what else got announced since we talked last week? That Robert Whittaker thinks he can be back in August. Do we really need an interim title for a co-main event when the champions can come back? His exploding bowel is healed? Come on.
There's got to be a limit. So I think this all started with Dominic Cruz the first time he got injured and was out almost 2 years, and people were like, and then the interim situation had to happen. What's a good amount of time for there to be an interim title, and for what specific reasons? That's what I think. If we had answers to those two questions, it would clear this up a little bit and make it a little less messy. I mean, you guys read the Eddie Alvarez article about him saying that interim titles are just
sick joke.
Yeah.
You called it a sick joke.
I don't necessarily know if I believe that, but also I'm not a fighter and I don't have a contract and I don't know how much money they're being made. To my understanding, if you're a main event and then it's a championship, there's extra money for those things.
Yep.
So I'm a little unclear, but I think those are the two questions that we need answered, and we wouldn't have this conversation so much.
Well, the priority switch from look, guys are getting injured. Someone needs to defend this belt. Let's put up a belt. In the meantime, while the champion, recuperates and is able to come back, to look, we got so many events in the year. We need a shiny belt on the poster. Who can fill that up?
We really don't, though.
I don't.
We really don't.
I don't.
Well, the promotion, I'm not saying I do, but I'm just saying the promotion feels like they do. Maybe you don't because you're a hardcore, but the casuals, they might see a pay-per-view and just two guys standing there be like, okay, what is this? But once you put on a belt, you go, okay, there might be something at stake here. Let me tune in to see who becomes the interim champ. I don't know.
The thing about the belts, my understanding is UFC's done research on their consumer base, and they have responded favorably to having titles on cards, and I think that's why they do it. You say, oh, we don't need it. well, right, because this is all
We'll
we
watch
do.
it anyway.
But it turns
Yeah.
out that the customer base actually responds favorably
Sure.
to it, which is why they keep
Yeah, but
doing
it's a bait and switch joke. I mean, yesterday I was at a media event all day with Canelo Alvarez. Danny Jacobs are going to fight for the middleweight championship. They're unifying, I think it's either 3 or 4 of the 4
a
belts,
bunch, yeah.
which is already a joke to have 4 belts. But WBC then, like, we're going to create a special WBC Mayan championship. And we're going to create a special WBC Diamond championship. And just so we can hold up this ridiculous belt in press
a
conferences.
Mayan championship?
A Mayan championship.
They get a Peruvian fighter. They're going to have an Incan one. Too?
But it's no different than turning on ESPN and seeing a lower level fight card and somebody's holding up some red belt in the back that means nothing, but it's just trying to fool the viewer that this matters. It doesn't matter. Stop the madness. Give more value to your championship.
What does this do to the featherweight division?
That's my big
We're
question.
gonna find out. It puts
Yeah.
it in a limbo because who knows what happens in that fight? What if Max Holloway gets injured? What if, because of the lack of, weight cut at 145, he gets a little bigger and then can't cut down? We don't know, but I think there has to be some sort of repercussion from this.
Well, I asked Brian Ortega that yesterday, and he did tell me over the phone that if Max wins,
Wait, hold on. Parentheses real quick before we finish. I do know what's gonna happen. Another interim title.
At featherweight.
how dare you?
Maybe.
He says if Max wins, he more or less said he expects to fight for the featherweight title this summer. He didn't say the name Jose Aldo, but I'm saying that name, brother. Heck yeah.
Yeah.
And then
I
he
spoke
said,
to him too. He told me the same
yeah,
thing.
and then he said if Max loses, he expects to rematch Max later this year.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. Let me ask you about this one, Danny. This is to circle back to the conversation last week. And literally, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't even know what the right answer is. Truly, I don't know. Because I don't know if we want to double down on interim titles. Because if you asked me, I made this point on Twitter, everyone's like, man, Max and Dustin fought so long ago, 2012. 2012, 2 months before that, 2012 was the last time Tony Ferguson lost a fight. Was the year that those two guys first fought. The idea, like if you wanted to, this is why I tweeted, I was like, if you want to make Max versus Poirier, because that's the best option you have, even if it's riddled with problems, I get it. Just don't tell me Tony has anything to prove to anybody, because he doesn't. What should the UFC do? Should they give it to the winner of Max versus Poirier, or should they give it to Tony Ferguson no matter what?
Dude, I've been praying to the MMA gods for now some time that I really want to watch Khabib versus Tony Ferguson. Forget about the belts, forget about everything. Stylistically, those are two of the best lightweights ever, and with very distinct styles. And one of them, they're both like the kryptonite to each other, kind of, because you can't stand with Ferguson, right? But you can't also take him down and chill in his guard, right? So this is a very interesting matchup. That's the person that I think, first of all, they have so much history. He was interim champion. That guy needs the next crack. I know Dustin as well. He's put in the work, but I feel like Tony Ferguson's, has more of a claim to that. I don't know. Hopefully,
You're a matchmaker. What do you do?
I think you make that fight happen as soon as Khabib is able to return. And then, you give the winner of that fight to the winner of Holloway and Poirier.
I think that what the UFC is hoping and praying is that the winner of Holloway Poirier either can make the quickest turnaround or the slowest turnaround. Either way, in other words, if they're ready to go, they're the readiest to go, we can just put them in the fight. Or, he's not going to be ready to go, Tony, slot him on in.
Yeah.
That's, I think, what they're hoping for.
That has to happen, because if that doesn't happen, it's going to be like Mayweather-Pacquiao, where that fight's happening 5 years later than when we kind of felt like it was at the peak moment to happen. So it needs to happen sooner rather than later.
Us hardcores want Tony and Khabib more than anything, and you just
so.
nailed that. But does the UFC, do you think, wants Max Khabib way more than they want Tony Khabib 5?
Ooh, that's an interesting question.
They tried to make it already, of course, and that was the famous
Yeah.
Brooklyn presser I
is
was
this
at.
what we're building toward, essentially, and then they can just go, hey, Tony, we tried, you didn't want it.
I don't know. I don't know what they don't like malcontents, and this is the last thing I want to sort of say about this, because then we got other stuff we got to get to.
I mean, the UFC has tried to book the matchup 5 times.
That's what I'm saying. I think we're almost saying that.
No. They've tried. But my point is this. Forget about malcontents. Sitting on the sidelines. I get why fighters do it, man. I get why Stipe did it. I get why Tony's doing it. You can completely understand, especially in the case of Tony. Stipe's coming off of a loss that he had 6 months to prepare for, and he lost in the first round via clean stoppage. I get why he thinks he's entitled to a rematch because of his stature in the division. Okay. But Tony hasn't lost in 7 years. In 7, most UFC careers aren't 7 years.
Yeah.
And he hasn't lost in 7 years. The idea that he's being asked to make another lap move is so insulting. On the other hand, what benefit is he really going to get by sitting out unless he gets a lucky break with somebody else's injury? Does anybody know?
No.
Well, nonetheless, like say if he were to fight Dustin Poirier for that interim title, you're knocking out a contender. You're knocking out another guy who's gunning for that spot. So if you knock him out and then if I would say after Tony Ferguson, the most deserving contender would be Dustin Poirier. And if he's coming off a loss, then you can't make that matchup with the champion, right? So you're just basically claiming your shot, even more. But I feel like Tony Ferguson in a position where, like, dude, fighting is definitely not a healthy thing to do. I've already put in so much work. I've gotten injured. I've already become interim champ. Like, I don't need this BS. Like, I already deserve it, period. But yeah, I think, it would help something, right, if he were to fight.
Any final thoughts on this before we move on? Nope. Okay. Let's talk about this one. Not a great topic to get to, but we have to get to it. I'm going to jump around just based on time constraints. Matt Hughes was in the news this week because his wife has filed for divorce, but currently his wife and his twin brother Mark, who folks may not remember, fought in the UFC at UFC 28 in 2000, have both filed restraining and been granted restraining orders against him for what was alleged to be a pretty difficult bout with domestic violence. The one with his brother deals with his brother's son, his nephew, but in the case of his wife claims that on multiple occasions she's been assaulted. Now, I don't know to what extent law enforcement's going to get involved beyond that, but to be clear, he has a problem. He has since released a statement saying that they're making me out to be a monster, and it appeared that he was signaling that people are tired of him because of his accident with the train that has caused him to be a burden to others. You can interpret that one of two ways. You can say that's a lot of self-pity for a guy who's attacking other people, or you can say that there might be some real medical truth to it, and maybe I don't know what the answer is. But Phoenix, I'll go to you on this one. Two questions. Number one, how should the MMA community view Matt Hughes given this news? And two, what, if anything, should the UFC do about Matt Hughes?
There's a lot of ways to compartmentalize how we view people. Just because someone's a hero in the cage doesn't mean they're a great person on the outside of it. And I think, as I know this about American culture, I can't speak for every other culture, but the things that we seem to love are, action and hero worship. It's one of the reasons why the superhero movies are so big, and why
do love comics,
I do, and why football has replaced baseball as an American pastime, right? Like, we really, really love these action things. It doesn't necessarily mean that people are all in great people. I don't know Matt Hughes personally. I've actually never met him, never interviewed him. I know Pat Miletich, who I work with, speaks really highly of him all the time, but I don't know him as a person. I don't know how true or untrue things are, but I definitely believe, especially the era that he's coming from and the situation that he's been in with that accident, he definitely has some issues that he needs help with. I think the UFC should probably get him help, since they have the Performance Institute. They have all these connections in those areas to maybe get him to see therapists or get brain scans or whatever it is. What does that mean for him as a Hall of Famer? That's really hard to say. Does that mean that anybody who has crimes against them should not be in the Hall of Fame? That's a possibility too, unless there's some sort of redemption that's happened or rehabilitation that's happened within that. I just feel that, you can still admire what he's done in the cage and also say, damn, this is a troubled person at this particular time.
Yeah, this was the saddest story I've ever seen. And there's always that dark side to covering any kind of combat or action sport. A lot of it to do with brain damage. And in his situation with the accident is almost double in terms of, I look at him in some ways as a victim. There's a horrible sort of crimes against him, but this is, he seems to be a danger to himself and others right now. That statement was sad, I thought, when you read it in full context. And, we have evidence, I can use words like Junior Seau and Chris Benoit. We have evidence of how bad this goes in the end. He needs help right now, and I hope this is a wake-up call that you mentioned from that era. More fighters, we're seeing in the NFL.
Did Junior Seau have domestic violence problems?
I don't know for sure, but we saw the way the ending was, and it's sad. It's very sad.
Chris Benoit did, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he had some pretty documented problems.
Yeah, it's a very sad situation because this sport was built off, guys like Matt Hughes, guys like Chuck Liddell, even GSP, like with the passing of the torch. So he was very important for that era. And it's just horrible to hear what's happening.
My question is, what responsibility, if any, maybe they don't.
Yeah,
but what responsibility does UFC have?
It's tough because he's no longer a current, like, an active fighter. I think if he was an active fighter, then the UFC would probably have more responsibility than they do now. I can just, for example, draw a parallel to soccer. Arda Turan, former Atletico player, your favorite team, right?
Yep.
He has some issues, and he's already in another team. Atletico Madrid has nothing to do with that, but I do think as the UFC has always been more responsible than just as athletes, but like for the sport in general, I think and just knowing the type of fights that he's been into and all that, I think somebody should try to go out there and seek some
I'll
help
add to that. I think medically, the UFC or these organizations in general should take care of these athletes for the rest of their lives because they have the connections and they're able to do so. And when we talk about medically, we're always just thinking about their physical health, but your mental health is just such a huge part of that as well. And if they have the connections in order to do so, I mean, if you look at the Performance Institute is like this gorgeous mecca of everything sports, mental stuff is such a big part of it as well. So I wish and I hope that they would take responsibility for their fighters long into the future of their careers and then afterwards.
This is a key question on responsibility. I think there's two sides to it. I think ethically, everything you nailed. For all these guys that have given so much inside the octagon, there should be systems involved to take care of them afterwards. But it even goes beyond ethical. It goes to being PR and business. And this happened in WWE. And I know I'm always the wrestling guy, but in the 2000s, Benoit tragedy. There was a lot of tragedies in the 2000s of these guys, late 30s, early 40s, life on the road. In the old school ways of how pro wrestling was, they were dropping left and right. What WWE did to their credit was create, almost the model of what the UFC Performance Institute took from that Performance Center. And what that whole thing was about was rewiring the way fighters think from the beginning, not from after their career, and how to take care of their bodies, how to take care of themselves, and have a much stricter concussion protocol, and really just identify that it's a really bad end game if we don't. And at the same time, for business purposes, we can't have the bad PR that comes with this of guys dropping left and right.
I think that they're on their way to that. It's interesting. I've never been to the UFC Performance Institute, and again, it's easy for me to make demands on them. But you made a great point, Phoenix. They got the whirlpools and the hammer strength and everything else you need. Is there anybody on call there who's like a sports psychologist? Is there anybody on there who athletes can talk to about some of their competition woes or maybe any other factors?
I think so, yeah. I interviewed Alejandro Perez, who actually fights at UFC 235, unbeaten in his last 7 fights. He had gone a lot to the Performance Institute. I believe he told me there was a sports psychologist.
Great. More of that, please. More of that, please.
Yeah, and to be fair, we're still such a new sport. I mean, I think the sports science has just recently caught up to the demands of the sport. So I think a lot of these things are coming into play now, are being experimented with now. And I think maybe in 10 years, this won't really be a conversation. It'll be part of the thing. And also, if a guy needs help and won't get help, that's really not their responsibility, right? Like they can't force somebody to get help either.
Yeah, you can only get help if you want it.
Right.
Or they commit you. But I thought about this a lot. I was like, I don't know what the right answer is. Here's one thing I would say. I don't begrudge the UFC honoring their legends, but they did kind of whitewash his image a little bit. If you had known Hughes growing up or coming up in the sport, he was really a decorated competitor, obviously, but there were stories that were floating around that were not really contested about what a bully he was. If you read his autobiography, like He Was Without Sin Cast the First Stone, I'm really saying after the accident, you can understand why the UFC would want to take care of him, but it did this sort of image reformation that in the end, I don't know how good that is to not tell the truth. But more to the point, I do think they owe him something. Owe is a strong word. But this was a guy you not only put in your Hall of Fame, this was a guy you put on a lifetime salary before the WME sale. This is a guy you had walk out to his own music in this incredible moment after the train accident. This is a guy they clearly value a lot. Don't owe, I don't know, but the right thing to do is at least, if he doesn't want it, he doesn't want it. But the right thing to do is to reach out and give him help.
Even to save face for themselves, the right thing to do is to take their...
Or to understand what happens to somebody, even if it's just a scientific principle of saying what are some of the results of what happened to those athletes and how can we learn from those experiences? I mean, I think that's a big part of it too.
It's a bad look for a guy that has been such an integral part of the company to now, I'm not saying they've abandoned him, that's not what I'm suggesting, but...
Right.
To look the other way now, I would not like to hear that. All right, because we started a little bit late, we ran a little long. Let's do it now. It is time for Under the Radar, a story that kind of went by. there's a bunch you could pick from today because we didn't get to half of the rundown, so I apologize. If you want to pick from that, you certainly may. Start at that end of the table and work this way forward. Brian, what is under the radar?
Heck of a week for Brian Ortega. All right, that it was announced this morning that he has the Modelo, these next UFC-sponsored athletes, so it's a nice campaign and endorsement deal for him. And I don't know if you saw Monday on Twitter and Instagram, but the Halle Berry put out a picture, two of them, with hashtag #ManCrushMonday, and said that Brian has accepted her offer to train her for her upcoming movie, I think it's called Bruised, in which she's going to play an MMA fighter. And I talked to Brian, I congratulated him on that, and I'm too much of a gentleman. I know the question you want. Did he smash? I'm way too much of a gentleman. I'm not going there, TNA City. I'm not going there. My whole point was I said, congratulations, great business relationship. You know what he told me? He said, you're the only male who has congratulated me. Everyone else has been way too jealous. So, hey, shout out to T-City on that one.
There you go. Very good one. What's under the radar, Phoenix?
Ooh, well, two things.
Okay.
If I could say.
Sure.
I'm a little bit of a Muay Thai nerd, so I found this really interesting that Cosmo Alexandra versus Sage Northcutt for ONE FC. I was like, ooh, I want to see this. I want to see, and it's for an MMA fight too, but I'm sure they'll stand up. But I just thought that was really interesting. And then on the card this weekend, we didn't get to talk about Tisha Torres versus Zhang, I think her last name is. I've never seen her fight, so I Googled her and I looked. You know, there's a lot you can or can't tell from someone's highlight reel because you're not seeing the full story of the fight, you're just seeing the best clips, but you can see technique and you can see speed. And at that division, of course, they have that, but the technique was very, very good. And then she had this fitness video that was like me watching Rocky IV. I wanted to go to the gym. I'm like, I'm gonna do that move, I'm gonna try that out. I mean, she's interesting, this Chinese girl. I'm looking forward to that fight a lot more now.
I'm looking forward to the maturation of the Chinese market. That's gonna be interesting to watch. Danny, what's under the radar?
Mackenzie Dern recently announced that, she's pregnant. Congrats to her. So she'll be putting her career on hold. And, I just thought it was very interesting because the athletes that we've seen, have to go through, pregnancy have usually been sort of in the later stages of their career once they've already sort of built something, in MMA. And, she's very new to the sport. She's a prospect. So, I feel like maybe not a lot of people saw it coming, but, congrats to her. And I guess we'll have to wait to see her return to the octagon.
For some reason, I thought she was still dating Buchecha. And I was like, really? They have her having a kid? But I guess she's dating some Brazilian surfer, something like that?
I think so.
Hey, that's none of your business. We talk about fights on this.
If you make a relationship public, people are going to acknowledge that it is a thing that exists. For me, under the radar, not really under the radar, but I wanted to mention the rundown. Didn't get a chance to do it, so I'll just mention it now. PFL signing with ESPN Plus, I thought was kind of interesting. People are like, what's this going to do for the PFL? It's obviously not a bad thing. It's a good thing. I don't know that it substantively changes much for them, if I could be candid with you. Even those Brazilian cards that aired on ESPN Plus, I don't think a lot of people saw them just yet, if I can be honest. So I don't know that this is like some kind of game changer for them, but it is good that they're going to have the money to do yet more tournaments. It is good that they're going to be a big platform. To me, the bigger takeaway is that is something 10 years ago the UFC would never have allowed. And in fact, I suspect they still have contractual language that says if any other MMA promotion is going to be added to the roster, that UFC has a right of first refusal. Like, you can't get that past them without them agreeing to it. I don't know if that's a fact, but they used to be clear that they wanted to make sure they were the only MMA promotion on whatever channel that they aired on. To let even ESPN bring in another promotion, however distant it may be, signals a bit of a shift, more than a bit.
Well, it signals more than a shift, because part of this is ESPN2 is part of their deal as well. It's not just Plus.
And Deportes. Yeah.
So does this mean that we're looking at PFL becoming the AAA official feeder league for UFC?
Seems that way, yeah. Seems that way. I would have thought DAZN would have picked them up, to be candid with you. I thought that would have been a better fit because they air on Thursdays, So you need a reason to tune into. I turn into DAZN once a month.
Well, DAZN is Combate as well as Bellator, and this could be an ESPN Plus counter move against DAZN to take.
It's just interesting how the streaming platforms are like gobbling up different promotions and now battling it out. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. So that was my semi under the radar. Okay, we are not done. We have taken your questions using the hashtag #TheMMABeat. We're going to answer them in a segment we call After the Beat. So don't go anywhere. Keep it locked. Yeah, let's do that right now. Time now for After the Beat, donks. My name is Luke Thomas, SiriusXM, MMA Fighting, Danny Segura, MMA Fighting, Phoenix Carnivale, The Universe, and then at the end you have Brian Campbell from your
local gas station.
Your local
7-Eleven.
Sit-Go. Okay, we have taken some of your questions. We're going to have to fire through these a little bit quickly, but given the time constraints. Hashtag thanks, Amtrak. So, Phoenix, ladies first, I will go to you. Does UFC negotiating a higher percentage of their pay-per-view split, for folks who may not have seen, they renegotiated with the MSOs, now they get a bigger cut of every pay-per-view buy. Does that encourage a stronger show, like UFC 235, to increase revenue, or weaker ones, like UFC 234, as they can generate the same revenue with less buys? What do you think?
I think it should, and I might not be totally correct on this, it should generate stronger shows. Because if you look at it, there's really a pay-per-view per month, one pay-per-view a month. So then I feel like everything that's happening around those pay-per-views kind of sets up the following pay-per-view. So it could be really, really strong shows. And like, let's just admit it, you're never going to have every single one be a home run. I've accepted that in MMA. I'm also a little less picky than everyone else because I do work for the LFA, so I see people on the come up. So if the name's not super familiar to everyone, it's usually pretty familiar to me because I watch them come up, and that makes a better card for me, so I'm a little bit more interested. But I think that the idea is to make the quality of pay-per-views better because people still have to shell out individual money for them. So I hope that I'm right.
What do you guys think? Here's my theory about this one. I think I agree with that.
Yeah.
My thought was they have pared down the number of pay-per-views, so they want to make those a little bit more special if they can, 12 a year, right? So that tells you that it's still a priority. It's still the cornerstone of what they do. It's still where all the biggest fighters go. That can't really change. But I do think in the case of like a 234, if they have just a couple of big names on it and it's in a foreign remote place, they're okay. They don't really mind.
Yeah.
Did 175,000 buys. They're like, yeah, that's fine. Yeah. The next one will be big, you know?
So I don't know much about wrestling, but so I'll ask you, is that the way that the WWE does stuff? Like where it's like, their big pay-per-views, all the Monday Night Raws or whatever lead up to those big pay-per-views?
Yeah, they're
like
on a monthly pay-per-view system, and they build toward it on their TV shows. The difference is they've set the model of taking it away from the pay-per-view game and putting it on their own WWE streaming network.
You can still buy it on pay-per-view if you want, right?
You still can, yeah.
Oh,
Very few people do, but that means most of the income is coming into them. It's a different pay structure. People are only paying $9. It's more of a DAZN pay structure.
How is the WWE Network? Is that a good service?
It's a great service. It really is. It really is. You not only get live fights. You know, they're sort of their AAA promotion. You get the full historic library, and you get all the pay-per-views. So it's.
Dude, what happens to, like after a Raw airs? Does that ever go on the network?
It does but like a month later because of
like pay-per-views or something. Yeah. Okay. Any thoughts on that?
I think it works both ways. I think they can use some of that money to invest it back in the card and really stack up a card. But like you mentioned, it can also be like, hey, look, the main event for UFC 234 fell out, but hey, we're still gonna be fine. We're gonna get a little bit more money, even if we do get less buys. So I think
they're gonna be fine. But how about us as the paying public? All right,
yeah,
we're gonna
exactly.
Be fine?
That's
who am I
the
kidding?
real
I haven't
question.
paid for a pay-per-view in years. Yeah, or ever. Thank you.
You are a jerk job. All right, next. Danny, looking at what happened to the talent after the purchase, which company was the best buy for the UFC? Strikeforce or WEC? Wow. I love this question. That's a tough. Think long and hard about that one. That's a tough
Shout out
one.
to that Don Grease, right? Nice.
That's a good question.
I would go with WEC.
Okay, tell me why.
Why? Because, actually new weight classes were created. You know what I'm saying? I think they had up to 155. That's the lowest they went before the WEC purchase.
That's right.
And once they purchased WEC, then you got, all these other fighters and all these new weight classes. Not only that, but a lot of 55ers, were able to drop down, and that was very healthy for their promotion as well. And the lower weight classes, like I know, like for example, maybe flyweight didn't pan out, but for example, featherweight has been killing it, has been killing it, and has been big for the
bantamweight is.
I mean,
amazing
Conor
too.
McGregor came up through the featherweight division. If they didn't purchase WEC, who knows if that would have been around, right? So I would say WEC.
What do you think?
I would have said the exact same thing, but I would have thought WEC for the lower weights and then Strikeforce for the higher weights.
I see. Okay.
We got Daniel Cormier from Strikeforce. I mean, I just felt like,
many big
Well,
names.
let's compare that. It's like on one end you got Aldo, Cowboy, Faber, and Dominic Cruz, and on the
Benson
other end,
Henderson. Remember, he was a champion for a while.
the other end you got
Demetrius Johnson.
Luke Rockhold came from the
You got Cormier, Rockhold.
You got Brian Stan, Steve the robot Cantwell. Let's see.
Right, don't
Ronda Rousey.
Carlos Condit.
Don't go too deep down the food
Carlos
chain, but let's
Condit.
stay on Strikeforce. Then you got
right.
you got Rousey,
Ronda,
you got
Misha.
Woodley,
Wait, did Rousey join
Lawler.
before the purchase?
No,
right?
No, that was a. There's a big misconception about who got
Yeah.
that. That's a Sean Shelby acquisition. Well, it was Ronda Rousey.
Strikeforce has got some pretty big names there, though.
Yeah.
We're talking about guys that are still champions today.
I would say that you got a lot of infrastructure from WEC, but you got like bigger names.
You got Faber at the time. He was big.
He's big,
Yeah.
but I think you got bigger names out of the Strikeforce deal. But that's a great question.
Former
Yeah.
WEC champion Chael Sonnen you got too, though, so that might swing
Yeah.
the pub.
Paulo
Speaking of-
Filio.
By the way, under the radar,
Nick
Chael Sonnen
Diaz.
versus
yeah.
Lyoto Machida, Bellator rumors? Heck yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't even hear that.
It came
Yeah.
out today. Yeah.
Look, you just downplayed it. You just crapped all over it. Nothing?
No, it's fine. It's great.
Great old guy fight.
Yeah. Yes. Sure. I'm not disagreeing. I'm just not going to take my pants off as a consequence.
No passion. Nothing.
Bro, I'm dead inside.
All right.
Did you not realize that?
Well, we knew that, but
I am overworked.
What's the next question?
All right, next. This one go to you then, Brian Campbell. What's your worst date you ever had? Worst date
oh man,
you ever been on?
I've been on some really, really.
Bro, I've been on some horrendous ones. They have been terrible. Here, I'll go first.
I've thrown up on naked people. There's bad endings. All right.
Jesus, have you really? Did you just confess to a crime? Like, what's wrong with you?
No. No one gets this far in the show though, so it's like
Yeah, I would say for me, very quickly, I picked up a girl once. This is our second date. I don't know why she said yes. I picked her up, and then we get in the car, and the first thing she says is, "I got to be back in an hour. Is that cool?" And I was like, for what? And she was like, "I got a basketball game." I was like, "Oh, right, okay." So I see where this is going. It wasn't like the worst date, but it was like from the word go, it was clear like there's going to be a quick ending to this, and then that's going to be that. It's like if that's going to be your answer, just don't say yes to the date. You know what I'm saying? Like, be like, no. Like, okay, it's fine. Like, I'll live. You got any bad ones there, Dan's?
I don't know if there's some that I can mention.
Oh,
but,
that's not my worst one. That's just the worst one I can tell on air.
okay, well, I'll say it's not so bad. So once this was like maybe, it was actually somewhat recent, but I met with, this girl at a bar, and, she had a busy day at work, and she was like, I think on Adderall. So she was like very like, and it was just like a weird vibe. I wasn't feeling it.
Sounds like the plot to an adult film, right?
Okay, you're being weird today
Yeah.
unnecessarily.
I want to
disclose some
change my
details.
seat.
What do you got, Phoenix? Any bad dates?
I had this one guy who showed up dressed as, and I do like cosplay and all that crap at Comic-Con, but don't pick me up dressed like Luke Skywalker. That's not going to do it for me.
Oh my God.
And then
Darth Maul, maybe not.
Maybe
Yeah.
Darth Maul. At least I know you're creative. And then he burped all through brunch, and then tried to kiss my face after he had burped. He tried to pull my head to his face, and I was just like, ugh, Heisman. So I'm
That's in
really,
the range.
really glad I know martial arts. But yeah, I was like, I'm sorry, you do not have the force, and I'm out of here.
That's a good way
Yeah.
to end that. All right, next. Okay, to the table. Regardless of the fact MMA is a combat sport, surely a stringent drug testing policy is necessary, if not for anything else, but to prevent monetary barriers to entry to the top levels of the sport. I guess what he's saying is you want to have stringent drug testing in order to make sure that the rich don't use their relative powers of influence to gain additional advantages. What do we think? And a crowd goes mild. Okay.
Can you put that up again?
Yeah, put it up one more time. The question is worded a little bit strangely, but what he's basically saying is, shouldn't you have stringent drug testing as a way of making sure that people who have money versus people who don't, that those people who have the money don't get access to that influence, right? Because if you have, I think his question is, if you have stringent drug testing, they can't use money to go and do all the things that they would want to do to cheat. What do we think? True or false? Well, I'm the only one who's got ideas on this, apparently. This is totally false. What ends up happening when you have stringent drug testing is that it actually entrenches the power of the rich. It doesn't diminish it. Number one, any kind of appeals process, is going to be any fighter or any athlete who has money, they're going to run roughshod over it, right? You can afford the best lawyers.
Yeah.
So they are, part of the reason why Jon was able to get some of the deals that he got, I guarantee you, was because he had Howard Jacobs in his corner, who is a specialist in people who run afoul of anti-doping protocol. So that's one. Two, it actually turns out that the more stringent testing you get, you might get a few of the rich, but what you actually get is the poor and the middle class who can't afford their own proprietary drugs or the best kind of regimen to get ahead. So the stricter the drug testing, the more it actually empowers the very rich to lord that influence over everybody else.
I feel like this was a setup.
I thought it was, but I thought you guys would have some ideas, but I guess no.
I'm still confused about the Wada Vada. All I'm like is like, just let weed be okay.
I'll say this about the one thing. If you don't follow this stuff, I'm using the proverbial.
Hurt your brain.
Well, that hurts your brain,
Yeah.
but how is any average sports fan supposed to follow this? It's impossible
really,
to follow.
Yeah.
It's really hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's difficult.
Like, and the other systems, they're like, pick somebody. Adrian Peterson, I'm making something up.
Yeah.
Or Brian Cushing, 4-game suspension for roids again. You're like, oh, okay, well, whatever.
Yeah.
That makes sense, and then you go on about your day. This stuff is like picograms above a certain threshold is timed in the in-competition window outside of the VOD. You're like, how can anybody follow this?
No.
Well, no, USADA can't even follow it. I mean, it's a joke right now. It's an absolute joke.
All right, next. Okay. Now, I'm not going to ask you for 3 of your favorite TV shows, but maybe give me 1 or 2 of all-time favorite television shows.
But give me a genre. I have too many.
Okay, then give me 3.
Okay, well, right now I like the show The Last Kingdom on Netflix.
What is
It's
that?
awesome.
Last Kingdom,
It's
yeah.
like
Is that the one with the guy who plays Captain Kirk in the new Star
no,
Trek?
That's
Viking
something
one, right?
else. Yeah, it's sort of like Game of Thrones without the magic stuff, and it's really, really good.
The Last Kingdom?
The Last Kingdom.
Okay.
It's awesome.
All right.
I just finished True Detective, and like all-time favorite sitcom of all time is probably Frasier.
Ooh, you know I've never seen Frasier? I know.
I haven't. Seen it.
Frasier's like the Ben Askren of sitcoms. Right?
Oh my god.
Not sure what that means, but what about
Very
you?
cerebral.
But my favorite show of all time is The Wonder Years, and I'll argue that to the
That's a
death.
good one. That's a good one.
Death. I think I went down the rabbit hole of Parenthood, which is just, I've cried every episode. It's absolutely
Never even
amazing.
heard of it.
And right now, A Million Little Things on ABC, I think is the best show on television.
I don't watch network TV.
Oh my God, it's so good. It's a mix of a thriller mixed with a buddy kind of film and a
that's
recurring
cool.
show mixed
Yeah.
with a lot of mental health stuff. It's really good, really good.
Okay, Danny?
There's so many out there. Black Mirror is really good.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a great
Underrated
call.
a lot.
Yeah.
The Office is a classic. And a very underrated, there's some old British show, Peep Show. I don't know if you've seen it. You can't really find it on Netflix.
I'm the creepy one
stream
on
it.
the panel. I mean, look
But Peep Show is
comedy
really good.
show, though. I
Yeah,
think
it's a
I've seen
comedy
it,
show.
yes.
Yeah, it's really good. It's old. I think it's like early 2000s.
Yeah. That's old. Jesus.
Bro, early 2000s was like 19.
I know. No,
20
I'm
years
not
ago.
saying you're wrong. I'm not saying you're wrong.
Yeah, but man, there's so many out there. I was watching another one called Kingdom recently. It just came out on Netflix like this year, I think a few weeks ago.
You're watching The Last Kingdom, and you're just Kingdom?
Yeah. It's about zombies. Have you seen Ip Man, the movie?
Yeah, Ip
Ip
Man is
Man.
great.
Yes.
Combine that and zombies.
Oh, interesting. I would like
different.
that.
It's fun.
So, what am I watching? Right now, I'm watching, you know what's pretty good? I haven't finished the first season, but The Umbrella Academy on Netflix.
Matt Sarah screamed
my
at me
list, yeah.
about
I just,
not seeing it yet.
on a
Yeah.
whim, I just decided to watch the first episode and it got me right away. I was like, okay, it's pretty good. But all time favorite TV shows, I'm going to say,
Tough.
Breaking Bad was probably one of my
Yes.
favorite
That's
shows.
really
That
good.
was really good.
The Wire.
Yeah.
The Wire is better than Breaking Bad. People don't realize that.
I never saw Breaking Bad, but I saw a Colombian version, Metastasis.
Yes, but it had. This is a true story. My
Walter
wife would watch it.
Blanco.
Walter Blanco was the name, was the major character. I saw that, and it was. Correct me if I'm wrong. It wasn't crystal meth. It was blue cocaine, something like that, right?
Meta. I don't know exactly.
Yeah, I don't know what exactly
Meth.
it was. They called it meth.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I got that part wrong. So I'll say The Wire. That one. Anything else that really stands out, like a TV show that I was really into? No. I mean, I've watched certain seasons. Better Call Saul is good. The first season of where they make the robots that everyone bangs and kills on HBO Westworld. Yeah, that one.
That one's good.
The first season was good. Second season was
Game of Thrones is good.
I've
Game of Thrones.
never seen Game of Thrones.
You're missing out.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really genius, yeah.
And here's the thing. I grew up as a kid. My mom was like real weird about certain things. I was not allowed to watch most television, including sitcoms. I could not watch sitcoms. So I've only seen like 2 or 3 episodes of Seinfeld. That's it,
Such
man.
a
I'm with you on
classic.
that.
I know. What am I
never
missing?
really got into it. I tried.
I'm all about sitcoms, the old ones.
I will say this about Netflix. There was an article by Farhad Manjoo, who writes for the New York Times, about how Netflix is bringing in content from all across the world. And if you've never seen, they call it Money Heist, but if you've never seen, it's a Spanish show, like from Spain.
It was really good.
La Casa de Papel.
Yep.
Pretty good. Pretty fun, actually. All right, anything else? Yes? Table. I'm getting married tomorrow. Any tips on how to keep a good marriage, and how was your wedding? Or for Danny, and I guess Phoenix, you're not married, right?
No, not yet.
Or for Danny and Phoenix, how would you like your wedding to be? Who wants to go to this one? Tips for getting married.
Know how to keep
a good marriage.
I think as the girl here, I can say that the most important thing is figure out what you're fighting for. Try to listen as if you're hanging out and talking to your friend, because we get much more defensive in relationships because we take everything personally. But if somebody's upset about something, just listen to their point of view as if you're hanging out with one of your friends, as opposed to like just get combative, and that will change a lot. That will mull a lot of things over.
Look at that smile.
Yeah.
Look at that smile.
Yeah.
How would you like your wedding to be?
Cheap, because I'm broke.
A wedding is supposed to be a good party. It's not supposed to be about posturing.
Yes.
So if you do have a wedding, you want to make sure that everybody there is having a good time. So don't worry about the materialistic stuff as much as you worry about the good food and the good music.
Yeah. Brian, how many people were at your wedding?
There was a cutoff in the barn of 150.
It's a big wedding.
I would have liked to have, that cutting down the guest list is the most frustrating and stress. I always say this: the last 6 months of engagement was the most insane 6 months of my life.
Well, we did it totally different. We only had about 45 people at our wedding, and the way we did it was we said we were going to pay for everything, and we got a little help here or there, a couple grand here or there, but we said we're going to pay for everything. So that meant we had to be really super strict about the guest list. You can imagine my wife's in-laws in Colombia were not happy. Like, we know you can't come because we have to pay for you. We can't afford it. So we had about 45 people, and it was the rule was you're not going to be at this wedding if I don't know who you are.
Yeah.
I'm not having somebody bring somebody out. You're not. If I don't know you, you can't come. And so everyone at my wedding,
Misha, Brian Caraway, not coming.
Everyone at my wedding, I knew. Everyone at my wedding, I knew. And I mean this sincerely, as a person I'm generally miserable. I'm miserable right now. That was the happiest day of my life. I'm not even saying that because my wife does not watch any of my content. It was truly, I've never been that happy. I don't think I'll ever be that happy again. The happiest day of my life.
I had a great wedding, but the second it was over, I had wished I had done like backyard barbecue with like a tent and hot dogs.
They're so expensive. They're so expensive.
I would definitely try to do something low key. Like
it's better that way.
Yeah.
I don't want a bunch of
save that money for travel.
I want to celebrate this day
too.
with strangers. I don't want to celebrate this day with strangers.
Yeah.
I want people I know. One more? All right, last one. Is Jon Jones beating DC at heavyweight more impressive than him beating another heavyweight contender, maybe like Francis or Stipe? Granted, DC may be able to beat those other guys, but Jones holding 2 wins over DC, I feel like winning another one is kind of a given. What's more impressive, Table? Jon beating Stipe or Francis Ngannou, or him beating DC at heavyweight?
Him beating DC at heavyweight.
Why?
Because DC's already put himself at that table of the 5 or 6 greatest fighters in history, and we could argue to our lifetime's death if DC had stayed at heavyweight in his whole run and hadn't been such a good friend to Kane, whether right now he would be the no question greatest heavyweight. And the only debate would be is it DC or Fedor all time in any organization, and I think DC kind of robbed himself a bit of that, even though he still has an incredible legacy already right now. But I think DC's just a better opponent than Stipe, who he beat, and Francis or any of those other heavyweight donks.
What do you think, Phoenix?
I think I have to agree with him there. As much as I like to see the diversity and the way Jon can pick people apart, DC at max DC against Jon will really kind of settle a lot of questions that anybody could have.
I kind of agree with you guys. I think at this point right now, DC. Why also? Because he's the champion. He's the man at heavyweight, right? Technically, he's the best heavyweight. But I think, let's say, like if that fight never came to fruition and DC retired, and then I don't know, Stipe picked up the belt, defended it a couple of times. I think then defeating Stipe would be greater than going back and defeating DC at heavyweight, because he does have 2 wins over him. By
the way, if Kane hadn't lost to Ngannou, this debate would be different, because then we'd be like, well, Jones would have to beat Kane.
Yeah,
exactly. Imagine if Kane
available.
smoked Ngannou, then
Because I think we think maybe it's fueled by DC's comments, but we think Kane would beat DC in some kind of head-to-head death grudge match inside the cage.
Yeah, well, because DC sort of promotes him as like the guy in that weight class, when perhaps that wouldn't necessarily be the case. I think it just goes. I don't know what the answer is, but I think it goes to show. Most people are intrigued by Jones's potential matchups at heavyweight right now. Like, oh, Smith's a great challenger, and we'll see what happens on Saturday. But what I really want to see is the heavyweight fight. So I think it kind of speaks to that. All right, we're done. We appreciate you guys watching. Thank you so much. Huge weekend of action coming up. UFC 235 is so great. I'm so excited for it. So hope you guys get a chance to watch, and if you do, I hope you have a great time. For the panel, that is Brian, Phoenix, Danny. I'm Luke. Until next time, hands up, chin down, let them fly. This is the MMA Beat.